Welcome to the Decide to Move podcast, helping entrepreneurs like you make smart, pivotal shifts in your life and business. Tune in each episode for inspiring stories from brilliant business minds and trailblazers to find out how they made their big moves and how you can too. Now here's your host, author, speaker, business strategist, CEO, and founder of Decide to Move, Monica M. Bijou.
Hey. Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining me for another episode of Decide to Move podcast. I am excited to have you with me today, and especially for my guest. I have Sydney Wong. She is coming from Canada, but she's traveled around the world, and she'll give you her story about that, of her adventure when she came to the U.S. and how that actually got her to where she is right now, being the CEO and founder of Venturx. And she's here to talk about how you can get funding as a startup, especially for female entrepreneurs. Her journey has taught her a lot about why that's super important, why women have been literally struggling and not getting the funding that they actually rightly deserve, as well as what they have, should have, but most of them don't even know how to do so. So she's here to talk to us about how to actually get funding in such innovative ways that you'll be blown away. So make sure you get your pen and paper. And for those that don't have pen and paper because you're listening to it in your car, make sure that you come back and listen to the replay so that way you can hear all the great juices that she's going to deliver to us. So without further ado, Sydney, how are you doing today?
I'm doing great. Thank you so much for having me, Monica. I'm very excited to be here.
I'm excited to have you with me as well. So we got to talk a little bit, but if you can introduce the listeners as well as those that are listening or watching via YouTube, a little bit more about yourself and how you came on this journey.
Yeah, absolutely. So when I graduated from marketing here at McGill, I did my master's degree in France, and then I came back here to Montreal to work, and I was working in tech. And then I met a friend who said if I was very interested in learning more about tech and startups, then I needed to move down to Silicon Valley, which is where he actually lived. So within about 10 days, I bought a one-way ticket and I moved in with him. And then I was there for several months talking to different startups and investors and all these really interesting entrepreneurs who were, doing driving for Uber or dog walking for Wag. And they all had these very great strategic ways to get to where they wanted to be. And so I was so inspired by them. I really wanted to help early stage entrepreneurs. So that's how Venturx was born. It's using your business metrics in order to get to that next level, which that next level in our case is usually funding. And getting to that very first stage of funding is usually the absolute hardest. So I wanted to democratize your KPIs and your metrics in order to make sure that entrepreneurs get what they deserve and what they've worked so hard for.
Yeah, so before we even get into the nitty gritty of KPIs, because some people are like, okay, what is that? we'll let you dive more into that. Tell me a little, you said that you went from Canada to France back to the States. What was that journey like for you?
Yeah, so we talked about it a little bit before, how we are very inspired by our different environments and all these different kinds of elements, whether it's the people that you meet that inspire you, the social economic differences that you are then becoming completely much more prevalent to or much more aware of, that actually exist in other places. But because they're affecting certain locations in a much more extreme way, such as, let's say, wage gaps in San Francisco, which is where I was living, and versus, the ones in Montreal, which is not that, you can't really see it as well, let's say. Everyone is relatively in the same range, regardless of where they live, or their income and things like that. But when it comes to the US, it's definitely much more exaggerated. Your standard of living, your therefore ability to access certain people, certain powers, and certain funding. All of these are so dramatically different. And so then being able to have all of these different cultural, social, economic influences to build the technology that we're building currently in order to produce a better future for tomorrow is very, very important. And I think that it can benefit everyone in the world.
Most definitely. So, what was some of your experience? I know that you said that there was a vast difference of not only just from an economic standpoint, but what about like going into a tech world is more like a male, most people consider a male dominant field. So, what was your experience when you actually went to Silicon Valley and was pretty much working with some of the best as your friend was considering it?
Yeah, so that's a great question. So all throughout my career, I've chosen in within the marketing field. I've always chosen tech because it was one of those things that was growing super fast, especially during that time. And it's so funny that we're doing this podcast now because around the time that I was going into tech, we were also in a very uncertain economic environment. We were going through the last recession, and so it's very timely right now. There was this great coach who coaches a lot of entrepreneurs and CEOs who I did this great boot camp workshop with. And she explained things in such a unique way. She said that women are people who going into male dominated industries are those who do not tend to receive any help. So there's a few reasons that are in our conscious level and our subconscious level. So in our conscious level, people may argue, okay, well, women may not be applying for the promotions or applying for the jobs, even if they don't, hit, let's say, less than 10% of the requirements or 90% of the requirements. They're just not applying for it. So that is very conscious. The subconscious level, that's the part that was really interesting that she said. She said, everyone was roughly between, let's say, 25 to 45 in that group, in that room. And it was interesting because it was across various generations, and yet the actual situation was the same. She asked all of us, when you were first starting out, when you were at your first corporate job, how many people were in power that were women? Was it one? And everyone said yes. That was the maximum number. It wasn't just any number. That was the total number. And so she said that as a young person starting out in their career, their first job is always going to be the most influential. Your first manager is the most influential to you as well, whatever that may be. And so even knowing that subconsciously, in your head, you would always think that no matter what you did in that job, in that field, there was only one place for you. And yet, if you were a man in the same position starting out, there were 9 positions for you in the same decision level making level at all, right? So then they don't act the same kind of urgency or that same kind of conservativeness in that way. And they are also much more relaxed and much more in tune with the environment that's going on, as opposed to having that mentality of scarcity. Because if you do have the mentality of scarcity, knowing that there's only one position out there for you in a male-dominated environment, then that will always be your mind frame, whether you actually actively did anything about it or not. It's just something that you were taught. It's something that's ingrained in you. And so that's my experience when it comes to all of these different opportunities. They are all opportunities, which is great, and it's a growing number. But I was always the only one person that looked like me at every round table. That's still true today as an investor.
Yeah, I can imagine. And, oftentimes, I hear a lot of times people say women struggle working with women because of that, that feeling of scarcity, okay, we're competition, instead of it being, how can we collaborate together so that way we can actually help each other get to that next level. And it's when you go up, I'm going up with you kind of thing. But most times we're mostly looking at each other as a different competition. Was that something that you actually, when you would go to a place and see you and one other woman there, would you size her up and be like, okay, is this my competition right now? Or would you look at that person as a possible partner?
I would say that I can compare to my corporate life where I would have loved to have, a female mentor that when I was starting out to be able to ask questions to, or, have meetings with, or just have somebody to be able to bounce ideas off of. And being able to find that kind of mentor in those environments were very difficult. They were scarce or none, or, they're harder people to book time with. And I do hope that kind of environment changes for all young women going into these fields, because that's how you encourage more and more young women to go into these fields and therefore have the opportunity to work in a diverse, work environment.
Yeah, most definitely. So let's get all into the funding portion. How did that come about for you? I know that you left Silicon Valley and decided to go back to Canada. What was the decision that drove that?
Yes. So the U.S. has a very funny way of saying that your visa didn't pass, and then politely telling you to leave. So that was my decision.
That's a nice way to put it.
Yes. So I did come back here, and then there were a lot of opportunities here. But again, it's the same thing. I actually don't know very many women who have received these Canadian grants, but I do know that they're out there. So they exist. I just personally only know men who've received them. But they do have funding such as helping you cover certain, portions of your development process. So covering engineer, covering research and development, and those kinds of things. So they do have a lot of interesting things that are out there for Canadians that I wouldn't have had access to if I was in the US, because I wouldn't have had US citizenship anyway. But currently we are not receiving those things. And like I said, I actually don't know female entrepreneurs, unfortunately, that are receiving those things, but I do know people are. And so then actually building things out here is also a different kind of mentality, and it is also a lot more inexpensive to do so at the same time. So that is both an opportunity as well as it is a risk, because you do want a healthy balance of both. But the most important thing is that when it comes to building something for the funding industry, you are using hard numbers, you are using metrics, because you want to be rewarding and incentivizing people and giving exposure to people that are doing well in their businesses, regardless of their age, their gender, their race, and their nationality. And hopefully that is going to become more and more mainstream in the future.
And is that something that works for no matter where they are? Like, is it only for Canadians, or is it something that works for American citizens as well?
Yeah, so that's a very good question. It does work for both. So Canada is kind of seen like a very R&D, research and development kind of place when it comes to tech, and the US is seen as a very execution place. So they do go hand in hand in that way, and that's why it works for both. We are very focused on the North American market, both in terms of the Venturx platform as well as our angel fund.
Okay, nice. So let's get into that, because I know you said that for companies that are already thriving and they actually get rewarded for how well they're doing. Now we're moving into startups. Those are the companies that don't have anything to show how well they're basically how they will do. So you're basically baking on a word or their promise. And so can you give us some details of exactly what is required for a startup company to actually look for funding or even receive funding?
Yeah, so that's a really good question. So when it comes to startups, there's a variety of different ways that we can test things. So our platform tests for conversion, engagement, and financial runway as three really big parts. So financial runway just being how well you're managing your money. Just how well you're managing your money will tell investors how well you're going to manage theirs. In terms of the conversion, it's how you are converting leads into sales. And even if it doesn't get to that sale point yet, let's say you don't have that product just yet, even having other things like Kickstarter campaigns that work successfully because you were able to generate interest, or having letters of intent with customers, like big partner customers that are saying, hey, when you get to this phase, we will put in this order for this many units on this date. So having these kinds of contracts aren't actually sales, but they do help give you, let's say, points on our platform to show, okay, well, this is how well we are converting. This is us going in the right direction. And these are the customers that right after your funding will be able to do this, this, and this, and be able to get it into their hands. So that is all part of the umbrella of conversion. Engagement is a combination of retention and usage. So how many customers are coming back, or users are coming back, and how are you able to retain them, and how are they using it? Are they using it for a long time? Are they using it in the right way that you intended? Or are they kind of getting lost within the platform? What is it that you're doing in order to keep them highly engaged? And so some of these metrics will be more important than others, depending on your industry. But they're all important in terms of how well you're going to be vetted through different systems that are very similar to the eyes of investors.
Okay, I like that. So, can we break some of them down based on industry? So, you have like your services industry, those are like your coaches or people who are providing an actual service over a product. Can you go into the difference of for them, like for a company that is just starting out, they are, they don't have the ability to reach those big competitors because of the fact that they are newbies. How do they actually stand out in the game? You like actually get in the game to even be competitive?
Yeah, so that's a really good question. So we are only able to work with certain kinds of products, which are software products. They can be in any industry, though. So, for example, a customer relation software, a CRM, which is similar to like a Salesforce or an inventory management one. So that is one of the companies that have been on our platform, and they are specialized to be a CRM for breweries and cideries and alcohol, as well as food and any food and beverage, really. And so their KPIs, their key performance indicators, the most important things to them are actually the ability to retain customers. So their ability to retain customers during COVID-19 was something that was really impressive, because even though obviously bars and restaurants are closed, which is the customers of the breweries and distilleries and everything, these breweries and distilleries like the software so much that they were still on it 7 hours of the day on average, every single brewery. That means they didn't lose a single customer, and they had close to 100% retention, meaning that every single month they're either gaining more customers or they're still keeping in 100% of the customers they had the last month. So these are the kinds of metrics that are very, very important. So whether you're giving this away for free as a beta test, or a trial, or you're charging for it, all of these little key points are completely being tested, and they have to be unique to your industry. They have to be things that you are showing that you're a bit better than everyone else in your industry, or you're showing that kind of potential.
Okay, and so you said this is mostly for products. And so your company doesn't really deal with the services piece. Is there companies that do the services piece? And if so, like, would it be like considered a person's email list or like uh, freebies or different things like that that really makes a difference of saying, hey, I can see that you have potential because how the size of your, I guess, email list or your potential clients or contacts?
Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, so we deal with more kind of like the services that we deal with is software as a service, right? Like a SaaS product. But in terms of, let's say, a straight service, then the things that you would be looking at is how well that email list is growing and being retained, and the churn rate. So how many people are dropping off the email list, or how many people are not coming back to the service month after month, or what are the size of packages that you are selling compared to other people in your industry, and why and why not. So there's always going to be tangibles and intangible factors that make one business more competitive than the other, right? And these are not kind of all in one ways to be able to show all of them at once, but this is a starting point to be able to see the potential of all different kinds of startups.
Okay, because I'm just thinking about from a startup that is services and they literally have no email list. They're just kind of start off straight out of the game and literally want to be like, okay, well, I need funding and I don't know where to get it. I'm new to what I'm doing. Is there anything out there that they can do to start getting them ready to receive, say, a funding on the level that you just described?
Yeah, so on our blog, we have one of our most popular ones, which is called Finding Product Market Fit in 24 Hours. So product market fit is, are you building a solution that is matching the need that's in the market, right? And so there's this really funny marketer that I like to follow. His name is Noah Kagan. So if you guys want, you can look him up. So he did this really interesting talk at an engineering school on purpose, because he said that engineers, if they are coming up with ideas, they would want to build it. And he goes, no, you have to prove it as a service first. So that's what was really funny. So he said that, let's say the average person in that room, so it was like young professionals and engineering and students and things like that, let's say they make about $40 an hour. So would you pay $15 to save you 15 minutes? So the answer generally was yes, because you're almost making that same amount per hour. So it's kind of like, this is going to be worth your time. So the idea that he wanted to help somebody prove in that room live on the stage was parking. Okay, if I had an app that I had to pay $15 a month for, and I got to park in this reserved spot, how would I be able to do that? So without building the app, he got somebody to get the emails of all the other students in the room. And then he said, okay, when do you want to park in this spot? And he goes, for you to prove your service is an actual need in the market, go stand in that parking spot for an hour and see if the car comes back and gives you that $15. And then the more you're able to collect as a service, the better proof you have to actually build any part of your business, because you're going to get the most amount of feedback when you do the service yourself.
Most definitely. And when you say that, it reminds me of like one thing that as a coach, we often teach clients that are like when I have new clients or what, you can actually start selling a product before you even built it. Like say, for instance, if you have a certain type of course that you're training, most times they tell you, go ahead and build it. And then as you're going week by week of working with that, you find out additional things that you need to put in or take away, but you're already showing that you have a market that's interested in what that product is. So Is that similar to what you're talking about for those startups?
Yeah, absolutely. You need to always be determining how much demand there is and if that demand is growing or diminishing.
Okay. And so is there any other innovative ways that you will recommend that people can get funding?
So there's always this really interesting way of it's this theory called a thousand true fans. So if you're able to get 1,000 true fans, these people that are vouching for you, these people that are mavericks for your business, then that's all you'll ever need. It doesn't sound like it's a lot for like, a multi-million-dollar company per se, but it's actually a lot. And and so try it before you see if the investor is going to be your first fan. You never want the investor to be your first fan. You want them to be your 1,001st fan.
Okay, I've never heard it put that way as far as the investor, but that is good to know, because what would happen if they're your fan? Like, what is some of the, I guess, drawbacks if that person happened to become your fan, like as number one without any other customers?
Yeah, so one of the things that we do called due diligence as investors is that we would call up the early stage fans. So you better hope you have more than one for us to be able to actually call them up, see what their real interpretations are, their reviews are, and what they think about working with you, right? So hopefully these are all check boxes that you have done your research on and prepared for before you go to an investor, because the best thing that you want is to be able to have a list of people that will be able to vouch for you.
Oh, that's great. So let's kind of pretend like we have a little checklist. So if we can go through a checklist, one of those things would be, if you can kind of just go through like a checklist, like, hey, one of those things is having testimonies, obviously, having some type of letter of intent similar. Is that correct?
Yeah.
And continuing.
Yeah. So then it's either letters of intent or revenue or returning customers. So it just depends on what kind of industry that you're in, right? You may not be necessarily having very simple transactions. It could be very complex sales cycles. How well you're managing your financial runway. So if you are only 5 people and you've spent $1 million in like 3 months, then that's probably going to raise a red flag. But if you are 50 people and you spent $1 million in 3 months, it's going to tell a different story. So they're always making sure that the money that you are fundraising for will last you 12 to 18 months, and that it is fair and that it is on par with the market and everything else. And then your engagement, which is the other metric that Venturx tests you on, which is your retention and your usage. So how are people using what you're doing? And then how are people coming back? And are they coming back? And at what rate are they coming back? So all of these things should be able to tell you and lead you towards your 1,000 true fans.
Oh, nice. So if someone wanted to search for investors, they're in America or wherever they are, because I have listeners that are all over, what are some things that they need to look for in an investor to know that they're, I'm going to use a non-political term, but being hosed by an investor, like they're getting a fair I guess, will you consider it a fair rate and also a fair partner? Like, because basically a person who funds you becomes your partner until you pay them off. And so what are some things that you would recommend that they look for?
So make sure that you know things on the market. So that's number one. So what is going on in the actual market? How much are you expected to give up? What equity? And for how many, how much money of monthly recurring revenue, so which we call MRR. So that information can be found actually on the Venturx LinkedIn page. So there is a big PDF, I think it's like slide number 5 of that big PDF. It's called VC 101, and you can see how much you are expected to give up and at what level and all of these things. So it's broken down in a neat little graph by stage. So make sure that they're not asking for like a crazy amount for whatever amount of monthly recurring revenue that you happen to have. So make sure you know what's going on in the market. It's the same thing as knowing what job title you want next and knowing what other companies pay for that job title. It's just the market information, right? That is actually out there if you want to search it up. And like I said, it's on a copy of it is on our LinkedIn page and it's completely free. So that's step 1, knowing what's on the market. Step 2, knowing the investor. So why do you want to work with this particular investor? What is your reason? Because they do want to know the reason. So that's part of it. They do want to know the reason. You can't just like randomly ask people, which a lot of people do. They just randomly spray and pray method is a terrible method. So don't do that. But why do you want to work with this particular investor? Is that somebody who has a good reputation in your industry? Are they people that can help you raise your next round? Is that why? And if you're not sure of who this investor is, maybe they're new, maybe they're not, you can always go on angellist.co or Crunchbase. So these are 2 free startup websites. They're more like directories, and you can look up these investors or investment firms and just call up the other startups that they've invested in and just simply ask, hey, I'm a startup. I'm in negotiation with so-and-so. What is your experience working with them? Was it pro? Was it con? Things like that. Better to, I would say, call people that they've invested in a few years ago, not maybe right now. But if you call, let's say 10 and you get 2 calls back, then you have gotten more information than you would have if you spent years trying to figure this out on your own.
Oh, that's great, because that is so true. And it's just like anyone, if anytime you want to work with someone or be a partner, it's important to investigate and make sure that they are a strong funding base, because unfortunately with, the pandemic, people already are dealing with financial ruin and being put in situations that's very difficult. And the last thing you want to do is end up with a funder that actually is going to make things worse for you, and they may end up being out of business. And so that's super huge and important. So if someone wanted to get in touch with you and your company, what would you recommend how would they find you, and what's the best way for them to get in contact with you?
Yeah, absolutely. So you can always reach out on LinkedIn. I would say tag this podcast to tell me that you have heard about me from here and from Monica. And then always there is the contact us form. That is a very direct way to get in touch with our team. And that is on www.venturx.ca.
Yes, and I'll make sure that I put all that in the show notes. So do you have any additional things that you want to share with the listeners and those that are viewing?
So I would still say that no matter what is going on in today's world and today's economy, there is always opportunity out there as long as you're willing to look for it. And actually, just to keep in mind, some of the best advice that I have gotten is that the greatest opportunities actually stemmed from uncertain economies. So that's where Airbnb came out, and look where they are now. That's where Uber came out, and look where they are now. So you actually never know where a lot of uncertainty comes through when there's like a smallest amount of bright light. It just depends on how bright that light is shining.
Yeah, most definitely. And that is so true. I've actually been talking to a lot of coaches, and I can even be a testament myself that this year has been the best year for a lot of us, because people are now making pivotal shifts in their life, making pivotal shifts in their business. They're starting to seek help. One of the biggest things as a mental health therapist, a lot of people were afraid to ask for help, seek funding, or do certain things. But now it's kind of like, you know what? I can't keep doing this by myself. I definitely need some help and support. And so I've seen a lot of people getting out of their own way. The pride is, if they have that armor of pride, it's coming off. And people are really now at a place where they're like, okay, you know what? I need support. I need guidance. I need direction. Doing this by myself, it's not working. It's not helping. And so I really feel like this is the best time ever to, like you said, go on to Angel List and go on Crunch. And so that way you can actually learn about the funding, or even get in contact with Sydney, because she can probably provide you with a lot of great information as well. Not probably, she can, as you can already tell. So thank you so much, Sydney, because this has been super amazing and helpful, because as entrepreneurs that are going in, whether there's a service base or they actually have a product like a software, it is super huge and important for them to be able to find someone and have someone that can direct them, especially when it comes to money. It's such a sensitive topic for so many people, but you're hearing from an expert that's actually able to share with each and every last one of you what are some ways, if you've been thinking about getting funding, contemplating, or in the midst of it, stop for a second and listen to this, so that way you can actually make sure that you are with the right investor. So anything else, Sydney, before we say goodbye to our lovely listeners and viewers?
No, I think that we've covered a lot of great ground here. I want to also thank you again for the opportunity. Love what you're doing, Monica.
Thank you so much. I love what you're doing as well. I always love to see when women are, powerful and doing their thing and creating, like you created a company out of all the experiences that you had, good and bad. And to me, that's the best thing ever. That's kind of how Decide to Move came about. So it's really all about that. So thank you so much, ladies and gentlemen, for watching me on another episode of Decide to Move, or listening to me on your favorite platform. And Sydney Wong has been here giving you some really great information. If you're, like I said, listening in your car or in a place where you can't write any of this down, go back and listen to the replay. Click the links in the actual show notes, so that way you can get in touch with her and be able to get a copy of that PDF that she talked about. So thank you so much for joining me for another episode. I always say that you can either be a product of your environment, or a fruit of your labor. You decide to move. Talk to you soon. Bye for now.
Thank you for listening to Decide to Move podcast with Monica M. Bijou. If you are ready to make a pivotal shift and take your destined position in the world, then schedule a free discovery call by going to www.decidetomove.com. For all links mentioned in today's show and to listen to previous episodes, go to www.decidetomove.podcast.com. And remember, we've all been delivered rotten fruit in our past. We can choose to chew on the rotten fruit trying to convince ourselves it's what we want, or we can become the fruits of our labor and create an incredible, fulfilling, and inspiring life and business out of it. You have what it takes to create the life you want.